Welcome everyone to our webinar, Embedding Experiential Learning on Capstone Projects. I'm Leon Lloyd with Edumondo, and I'm just going to host the start of this webinar before handing over to Dr. Megan Swanson, who's also going to be joined by Cheryl Bryant from Assiniboine Community College, which we're delighted to have and really grateful for Cheryl giving up her time for this. Thanks so much for everyone for joining on time and also for joining at difficult times. I know for a lot of you it's perhaps early in the morning and things like that. So really appreciate you giving up your time as well. We're going to be talking a lot about skills today, developing competencies, graduate skills, graduate outcomes, that sort of thing. And well, it'd be great to find out how Cheryl's using the simulation on her course at Assiniboine as well. I'm just going to take a little bit of time at the start, just 5 minutes or so, just to introduce a little bit about what we do at Edumondo, our approach to business management simulations, and yeah, how we do it, a little bit of background for us. But then we'll get straight into the conversation, hopefully leave a little bit of time for questions as well at the end, and perhaps even if there's 5 minutes at the end for a short demonstration of one of the simulations as well. So without further ado, just to explain a little bit about some kind of admin housekeeping type things. We are recording the session. If you like, feel free to unmute yourselves to ask questions, or you can ask questions in the chat, of course. You can take your cameras off as well if you want to show your face, but no requirement to do so, of course. We will follow up after the webinar just to give you a link of the recording. But if you have any questions or you'd like to look into anything and how it might work on your course, then feel free to get in contact. You can visit our website to find out more. Okay, well, a little bit about us. So Edumondo have been developing management simulations since 2001, so quite some experience of doing so. Based in The Hague in the Netherlands, but operating globally, we have over 40 employees and working with around 400 universities worldwide. Well, as you can imagine, that's quite a large number of students benefiting from our simulations each year. In terms of our approach to simulations, well, typically it works like this. So they're all just cloud-hosted, web-based, as you'd expect. They work on the browser, so no software to install, and they can be used on any devices. So smartphones is fine, tablets, but it's usually best to have a big screen where possible, at least one member within the team. And students in their teams of perhaps 4 students in a team, 5, it's flexible, will manage a company as if they're the strategic management of the company. Actually managing all functional areas usually as well. So giving students a sort of flavor of all the different operational departments. One round in the simulation usually equates to 1 year of operations, so 1 year of trading. And that's usually mapped across the weeks of study within a semester. Having said that, it's possible to condense all of those rounds into a very intensive session as well, perhaps over a day or 2 days, which we'll often do for MBA residentials or something like that, or as part of the induction process for new students. Really important to say is that within all our simulations, we have a wide suite of simulations. Within all of them, they all have this dynamic algorithm. And that's really crucial to making sure that it's a very competitive, realistic process and as close to real life as possible. It's also really what drives the engagement, because one team is competing against another team. So all teams combining to create this virtual marketplace, which you don't get when the students are competing against a computer. So that's also really nice because it means that there's no one clear fixed path to victory within the simulation. So you can't have a situation the following year where the previous year students have kind of posted online how to win the game. So every time it runs, it's a completely unique experience. We cater for all student levels, so right from sort of foundation right through to graduate and executive level. And a number of our simulations are highly flexible as well, meaning that we can sort of customize and tweak them to align really well with the topics of theory that you're delivering on your course. Just a little bit to say in terms of our vision for the future. And this is something that we're doing with a number of business schools already, especially those where we have strategic partnerships in place for experiential learning. And that is to provide students at every level of study with an opportunity to apply their theory in a real world context. By doing so, of course, the main focus is usually on the specific course learning outcomes, but it provides a wider programmatic benefit in terms of helping students to make those linkages between the siloed modules. Of course, and something that we're going to be talking in more detail about today a lot more, is developing those skills and competencies, something that really, really shines through strongly in the simulations. Of course, it's also a structured opportunity for students to get that collaboration and that active learning in their teams. Typically, this links really strongly to things like, high-level objectives like student engagement, satisfaction. We typically see really, really strong feedback scores from students, but also some where used strategically, sort of higher continuation rates, so retaining students, fewer dropouts, but also employability skills and graduate outcomes as well. So I think that's probably all I'm going to say for now. But yeah, we have a wide range of different simulations, and if you'd like to find out more, yeah, please feel free to get in contact afterwards. So, Cheryl, Megan, why don't you unmute yourselves and feel free to take over.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Leon. That was super helpful intro, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. As Leon said, we invited a lot of people from across the US. I'm in Seattle right now, and there's a lot of people from Canada and just all over the world, which is amazing. So Cheryl is joining us from Canada. So I'm Dr. Megan Swanson. I have a background in clinical psychology and higher education, and love working for Edmundo because I think that the experiential learning process is such a holistic and realistic way to support student growth and engagement, and have been working with Cheryl over the last couple of months and just really enjoyed talking with her because first and foremost, I felt like she was telling me the feedback that her students were giving her, and immediately I'm like, she is good at what she does, because students don't feedback honestly unless they have a real trust in their professor and who's providing them the information. So I was really impressed with her and keen to learn a little bit more about how she was using simulations within her courses. So Cheryl, if you want to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about Assiniboine, that would be great.
Sure. Thank you, Megan. Hello, everybody. My name is Cheryl Bryant. And as Megan had said, I'm an instructor at Assiniboine Community College, and I'm located in Brandon, Manitoba, Canada. So my background is accounting. I'm a CPA by trade. I have worked in public accounting firms and then also in industry where I was in management roles for over 20 years. So it's my 6th year as an instructor at Assiniboine Community College. So I'm not brand new, but I'm not a seasoned veteran by any means either. So just a little bit about Assiniboine Community College. Brandon is the 2nd largest city in Manitoba. We have a population of about 60,000 people, and Assiniboine Community College has a wide variety of programs. The area that I instruct in is our School of Business, where we offer 2-year business diplomas where students have a choice to major in accounting, marketing, human resources, or finance. I focus mainly on the accounting students. We also offer what's called an advanced diploma, so a 3rd year for students, and we're working towards providing a degree program as well. We also have a partnership with Cape Breton University where we're offering Masters in Business Admin program at Assiniboine as well. So yeah, most of the students that I work with, and especially with the simulation, are in our 2-year business admin diploma program, and they are accounting majors.
Oh, that's awesome. I think one of the questions that I get a lot is how simulations work within accounting. So I'd love to dig into that a little bit later on as well. But one of the things that I wanted to first ask you is so you've taught there for 6 years, you've been using simulations for the last year?
Just last year, yeah. That was my first introduction to the simulation, yeah.
And what made you think, okay, I need to do something different, I want to try a simulation?
Well, historically in our business program, we had kind of a capstone project, but it was often, kind of paper-based, I guess, problems or case studies. And I felt like it was getting a little bit repetitive for the students. So I started investigating the simulations. And I really liked what I saw with Edumundo, and I used the CFO challenge last year. So in our business admin program, we hadn't used a simulation before. So I was kind of the guinea pig that got the green light to go ahead and try out the simulation and see how it worked with the students, what the feedback was, how I felt it worked. And I had a really good experience with it last year. So I'm using it again this year. We haven't rolled it out to any other instructors yet, but I know that there's quite a few that are interested in it. So we may expand into some of the other areas as well. Mm-hmm.
Okay, amazing. So from the few years that you had not using it to the year that you had using it, what would you say are some differences that you noticed in terms of engagement, outcomes, and things like that within use of simulation?
I think the biggest thing that I've noticed is that the students had a lot of fun with the simulation. You know, it was something different. It wasn't just another paper that they had to write. It was competitive, which really kind of, as Leon mentioned, kind of spurred their interest and their commitment to the project, because after every round, they could kind of see where they fell. And then there's that healthy little bit of competition against their classmates where they're trying to do a little bit better. So I also found that it did for my purposes, I teach it in a business capstone course. So the idea of a business capstone is you're looking at the past year and a half of the education, and you're trying to bring all that into a class, but that also focuses on accounting. So I like that the simulation could use those other aspects as well that are important in business, the marketing, the HR, and finance, but in a kind of a backup to accounting type decisions. So I just felt that the students appreciated that. And it was, like I say, it wasn't just another paper. It was a fun activity that was really interactive and had more than just accounting.
Amazing. It's always fun to see when you see them actually about coming to class and doing something, rather than like that sense of dread when you're like, oh, I'm going to sign a paper.
Yeah.
What's their response going to be? Okay,
Right.
so you kind of touched on it, but why do you think specific to Capstone, the simulation works so well?
Well, I like the holistic approach where they have an opportunity to draw from their different areas of expertise. It's not just focused on the financial aspects. I also like the big part of it that I like is that it really focuses on the teamwork. You know, the students have to work together in order to get a good outcome. And they have that, you know, when they get out into the real world, the workforce, they've had kind of some experience working in teams and making what I think is real world decisions. I like kind of the employability skills that come out of it. And I think that that has been kind of a nice benefit of moving to the simulation.
Awesome. So because you're a CPA, and literally I think one of the in the North American clients that I've spoken with is how do we apply simulations specific to accounting classes? So what components of the simulations do you think really highlight what you're trying to get across as a professor in that area, but also as a CPA, so an understanding of the world of accounting?
Yeah, so the simulations have really good financial reports on them. So my goal is to get the students making decisions that affect the financials. So not just analyzing the financial statements, you know, we kind of do other projects around that where they analyze them and make recommendations. But in this simulation, they can make decisions on inventory, they can make decisions on their HR, they can make decisions on their advertising, and they can see directly how that affects the financial outcome. And that's what happens in the real world. So it's nice from my perspective that they're not just focusing on analyzing the financials, they can make decisions, see results in a really safe environment. You know, it's not affecting anybody's bottom line, but they can see what it does to the financials, and it helps them understand that any decisions you make within an organization affect the financials. And as you know, as CPAs, it's not just the financials we're looking at, it's looking at the whole business. And so it gives the students a bit of a chance to experience that before they leave the college.
Which is so cool. I love that, because it is it's important to give them that real world ability to like play in a safe place with what they'll do in the real world. And that's like what you just said is something that I really like about simulations is you do get to make these like risky decisions or, you know, these calculated decisions within a platform that is safe and see the actual outcomes before you go into an actual job where you're making
That's right.
in real life.
Yeah.
Okay, so how do you think your students responded? Like if you were to ask students that had your class 3 years ago versus the classes that have the simulation, what do you think from a learning outcome standpoint would be differences for them? Do you think they're gaining from the simulation usage? Yeah, what do you think the differences in the two courses would be?
I think in the simulation sense that they're gaining more, I think, applicable real world skills, and we're maybe developing those soft skills a little bit better. I often say to my students that from my years in industry, when you look at a resume, everybody that's coming out of a business degree, they've got those skills. They've passed those courses. They have those hard skills. So when I was hiring, I was looking at the soft skills. What other things have you learned? What other things do you seem to be better at? Are your public speaking skills good? Are your teamwork skills good? So some of those things, I think with the simulation, and we haven't kind of talked on yet kind of what I tack on to it, but I tack on a written report and an oral presentation. So some of those things help the students develop those soft skills a little bit better. So my hope is that kind of puts them up ahead in an interview. If everybody's coming in with the same education, maybe that you need something to set them apart, and having this opportunity to develop your soft skills might be the thing that sets them apart a bit.
Nice,
I'm
I love
hoping.
that. I was going to ask you in a little bit about assessment, but let's talk about it now. So assessment is something that also comes up a lot. How do you add the simulation into your current curriculum rubric? And what specific things do you add on to make it seamlessly fit in terms of an assessment, assurance of learning outcomes aspects?
Sure. So with my business capstone course, the simulation aspect, I weight 65% of the students' mark on the simulation. So 30% on the simulation itself. And within the simulation, I want them to take risks, and I want them to make decisions and see results, because I feel that's part of the learning. So within that 30%, I award marks based on where they finish, but not with a lot of, I kind of range from 25 or 24 out of 30 to 30 out of 30 based on where they finish in the simulation, so that they don't feel the pressure of making decisions. I kind of treat that as a learning aspect, that 30%. So the simulations themselves have a number that the students finish with, or the teams finish with. So I use that for my 30%. Then I also have a written report that's worth 20%, where I get the students each round to, I have a number of criteria within my rubrics, but for every round, they have to tell me what decisions that were up for them to make, what they analyzed prior to making the decision, what decision they made, why they made it, and then the ramifications of that decision. So the students, the ones that are doing what they're supposed to do that every week, kind of as they go along. And so it's not a hard thing to pull together at the end. If they've left it to the end, it's a little bit harder for them. But my idea is to see the progression from the first week to the last week with their decision-making process and their analytical process, that type of thing. So that's worth 20% of their mark. And then I get the students to do an oral formal presentation, professional presentation around the simulation as well, that is really a reflection of what happened in the simulation, what their thought processes were, what they felt they did well at, what they thought that they could have improved on now that they've kind of been through the process. How did they use that accounting information? I really pull that into that final presentation, and then that is worth 15% of their mark. So yeah, overall the simulation covers 60% of my or 65% of my course.
Nice. Okay. And how do you feel like, so as a professor, one thing that we always think about when you're putting people together in teams or groups is, what if there's one person that's pulling all the weight and there's other people that are kind of in the background, not doing much. So how do you ensure that all members of the group are equally contributing to their team within the simulation?
That's a great question, Megan. And I would have to say that that's probably the most angst my students have about this process, is who they're going to end up in a group with. And it's what I hear about the most when I get into my course. And you know, everyone's had that experience where they've had somebody in their group that doesn't contribute. So I use a peer evaluation process. But it's a little different than I think a lot of peer evaluations, in that it's worth 10% of their mark. But if they evaluate their peer and they give them 4 out of 10, they don't just lose 6 marks out of 100. So the process I use is, we do 2 rounds of self-evaluations and peer evaluations. And I mean, it's kind of a complicated process. I have a great big spreadsheet to figure it all out, but I get each students to rate their team members, but not without giving them some feedback first and an opportunity to improve on any issues that may arise. But the bottom line is, if a student ends up with an average from all of their evaluations by their peers of less than 8 out of 10, they get a prorated mark. So if the group finishes, say, all of their group work here within 80%, and somebody had got a 6 out of 10 as their peer evaluation average, they would get 6/8 of the 80%.
Okay.
So there is some incentive. And I've had the situation last year, you know, where 3 people got an A+ and 1 person got a D. And the person that got the D understood and didn't really care, kind of thing, which is fine. But the ones that got the A+ felt good because they didn't do all the work and have the D student get the A+. So I've used that not only in the simulation, but I've used it in other capstone projects with teamwork as well. And I like it. I think there's just a bit of a level of comfort to those students that if somebody is a social loafer, they're not going to come out with the same mark. So yeah,
I love that. And I love that you kind of give them a chance to discuss, hey, you know, this is not going well for you. What can we do to change that? But I also think peer evaluations are amazing. Like, they take them quite seriously, maybe because of their age, but also because they're being evaluated as well. So I love that. That's a really great way to do that. And the D+ student, I always used to say in teaching, it's like, it's the grade you earned, not the grade I gave. So I'm glad you didn't get any back on that, but also it's nice for those other students that did, you know, fill the team, that they got to shine as well. And I think it also further reflects that real world balance. You know, every job I've ever been in, there's always going to be one person that does more than another. And often that balances over a period of time, because in life, sometimes we have periods of life where we aren't as, but it reflects that in real life, there's always going to be someone that works harder than someone else. So it's great that you figured out a way to really manage that well, because that also is a question that comes up a lot in something that is inherently group work.
Yeah, for sure.
So just from a logistics perspective, how big is your class and how big are your teams? And do you find that those numbers work well for you?
Yeah, so the good thing about ACC is we have fairly small class sizes. Right now I have 21 students. So I've done 3 groups of 3 and 3 groups of 4. So I tried to keep it to 4. I think last year I had all groups of 4 except one was a group of 3, but it's seemed to have worked quite well. Yeah, I think it's worked good for me, 3 or 4. I don't know what other people use, but
I don't know. I think that's probably 3 to 5 is like a pretty normal range.
Yeah.
Do you think within those groups, people fall into natural roles within the team?
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of before I get into, in my class, we do another group assignment that the students are just finishing up now this term before we start the simulation next week. So I do a lot of kind of recapping on teamwork and natural roles and, kind of playing to people's strengths and weaknesses. So that it does seem to happen naturally. I try not to get involved in micromanaging teams. I try to get them to pretend they're in the workforce and they're working out a lot of things on their own before they run to their boss, or they run to, in my case, the instructor. But yeah, absolutely, those natural roles tend to take place just like they do in the workforce, I think.
That's probably kind of fun to watch with a smaller group like that, where you might naturally put them in one role, but you see them fall into another just organically. So I imagine just having chatted with you a few times, that's probably really nice for you to observe. Cool. So I know that this last year you used the CFO challenge, and then you're moving into a different challenge, which came from feedback from your students, which is, again, why I was like, she's amazing, because students often are reluctant to provide really like honest and helpful feedback. So what precipitated that change, and what feedback did you get from students that was really helpful around the simulations?
Okay, so at the end of the course, I sent around an anonymous survey to the students to get some feedback, because it was my first time using the simulation, and I did have a lot of really honest responses. Kind of what they liked best about it, what they liked least about it, and some of the students actually felt that it was maybe a little bit too easy. That I'd given them maybe a little bit too much time, which I kind of felt bad about. But then I thought, well, you know what, they got their hands full with their other courses right now. We're going to live and learn. So when we started looking at simulations, we looked at a few different ones, and the one I'm moving to is called Phone Ventures. There was a few things that I liked. I mean, CFO Challenge was great. It kind of had everything that we needed from my perspective, but the Phone Ventures is a little bit more, it's a bit bigger. You can move into multiple markets, so there's an international component to it as well that the students can expand into, or they don't have to, but it gives them some more options. So I think that there's more decision making, a little bit more decision making in the Phone Ventures, and it integrates a sustainability feature, which I think is really awesome, because we're always looking at ways to bring in more current things for the students to think about that are important. So that was really nice. And just kind of the layout of it was a little bit different. So I thought, well, I'll give it a try this year and see how we make out. Yeah.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to see how they do with it. The one thing that I think is really great that was highlighted by the feedback that they gave you, and you're moving into another one, is there's so many different features within the different simulations that you can choose to use or not use. So a little bit later, we'll have Leon show us the simulations, and specifically highlighting the one that you're going to use. But I think what's great is you can kind of add depth, or if you feel like they're struggling and it's too much, you can take some options away as well, so that it can meet the needs of undergrad all the way through graduate. So see how it goes.
Yeah, and I think last year, not being my first year with it, I didn't use all the features of CFO Challenge that were available, because I didn't want it to be too difficult for them. So it was just a little bit of a learning experience for me, for sure.
It's so hard to know, because you don't want to overwhelm them, to your point, but you also don't want them to be bored, and it's finding that balance takes time. So it's amazing that they gave you feedback that allowed you to be like, okay, this is actually going to be better. So I'm excited for you. So you said you do some work before you start the simulation in terms of group work and teamwork. I'm curious what you feel like are important before they start the simulation.
Well, being that it is an accounting capstone, I do get them to do a financial analysis of, they get to pick two different companies that are traded on the stock exchange that they can access within the same industry, that they can access their financial statements. And then they do an analysis and then a recommendation to which is a stronger financial company. So I really focus in on that accounting aspect kind of ahead of time in a different project with their team. It kind of gets them going as a team, and in a project that is worth a little bit less marks, but is extremely accounting focused. And the other thing I do at the very start is I just go through a lot of, positives of working in teams, why we focus on that so much at the college, what to do to get along in teams, and get them to do some self-evaluations of, experiences they've had in the past in teamwork. So I really kind of just try to hype up the teamwork aspect of it and remind them of the things that can go wrong, and that everybody's different, and we have got different personality types. We look at that a little bit, and how you can't change other people, but you can change the way you react to them. So I just spend a few weeks at the beginning. I'm going through that before we actually jump into the rest of the term in the same team.
Nice. I love that. It's psychology. You're in my wheelhouse.
Yeah. That's right.
Do you find that is helpful, and they go into it having some skills to work with teams that are necessary or needed? Like, how do they function in the teams? Do they like it?
Generally pretty well. I don't let my students pick the teams, and it's kind of interesting because in the past I've always picked the teams, and typically students complain. They want to pick their own teams. But every year at the end, when I kind of have my survey, I say, okay, looking back now, is this better that I pick the teams, or would you have preferred to pick the teams? And 90% of them come back and say, I'm glad you picked the teams, because then, you're not with your friend, and if there's a conflict kind of thing. So I find that they jump in on a real positive note. I really try to spin this on a positive note, and this is going to help them be successful in real life. And they do jump in positive. I mean, there's always one or two issues. That's inevitable. But I mean, I'm pretty clear that this is your team, and I'm not dismantling it. So we got to figure it out. And I mean, I've never had any major blow-ups or anything. Oh, I think you might.
Power of hindsight, though. I love that afterward they're like, no.
Oh, I feel like we might have lost you there, Megan. Oh.
I think Megan's internet connection is going a little bit unstable, so perhaps I'll just jump in as well a little bit.
Sure.
It's really interesting, though, Cheryl, to hear about how you're using it in detail as well. Megan, how's your internet connection looking? All good? Okay, we can hear you now. We can hear you.
There we go. Yeah.
No, it's perfect. Well, I wanted to see if anybody had any questions before we talked a little bit more specifically about the capstone portion of this. So if anybody has questions, you can either put them in chat, or you can come off mute and ask them.
There has been a few in the chat as we've been talking. I wasn't sure if you could see them, and if you were perhaps waiting and just until now, but that's fine. For example, Lana Tuss was asking about how much portion of the course do you use for the simulation? So I guess, I suppose, how many weeks then, and correlating to the rounds, but also specifically around whether the simulation includes financial analysis and tax preparation.
Okay, so to answer that one first, financial analysis for sure the simulation includes. The ones I have used have not included taxes, so we don't get into the taxes in this course. I allocate 5 weeks we have a 16-week term, so I allocate 5 weeks to the simulation. Now, last year I did 1 round of simulation per week. So we did 5 rounds of simulation. So this year I've beefed it up a little bit, and we're doing 8 rounds of a simulation in 5 weeks. So the first 2 weeks, I give them a week to do a round, just to get them to learn the program a little bit and get them familiar with the software. And then we bump up to 2 a week. So after the 5 weeks for the simulation, I spend another 2 weeks giving them 2 weeks where we work on the written report regarding the simulation, and then I give them another 2 weeks around the oral report. So then the last week we're presenting the oral report. So in all, I spend 10 out of my 16 weeks on the simulation.
Nice. So she also asked if you included analytics showing student time spent, or if the simulation does. So how do you know how much time your students are spending on the simulation?
If the simulation shows me that, I didn't know that. I'm going to look to Megan for that one. Quite honestly, I asked the students at the end of the course how much time they were spending on it. And they said about 4 hours a round. So that was part of the reason that I felt that I needed to increase it to 2 rounds per week. At the beginning, they were spending a bit more because they were trying to figure things out. But once they got familiar with the software, that was the feedback that I had gotten. But yeah, I don't think, did the simulation show us, Megan?
No,
No.
but
Okay.
yeah, it is. So we do see often that they'll spend more in the beginning and less towards the later rounds, to your point, as they start to figure things out and kind of get their head around them. Do you find your students are spending that time as a group working, or are they delegating and working alone that 4 hours? How do they break up their time?
So what I find with the simulation is that rather than divide and conquer, they work together. You know, in my written reports, I find that they divide and conquer. You know, they give different jobs out and then they come back. But with the simulation, my experience is that they're sitting together, they're talking about things, they're looking at them together on a just screen, and then they're making decisions around that. So I feel like the simulation provides more interactive decision making rather than individualistic work brought together.
Nice.
Which I like.
Yeah, no, I think that's awesome, because I think it depends. Different people do different things, but I love when you can bring them together as a group to work, because that's kind of a huge point of the simulation.
Yeah.
So Joe asked if we think simulations might work well in introductory accounting, of courses where you have different majors, not just accounting majors, where a capstone project is good, but why not start early? So I'll first answer and then you can, Cheryl, but yes, the simulations work across undergrad all the way through to graduate and across majors. So one of the things that we love about them is you can focus on introductory accounting, introductory marketing, introductory strategic management, any of those introductory classes, but also build into the higher level classes as they have more building blocks. So like we were speaking about a little earlier, you can add additional components, you can make it more or less difficult for them as they move through. So my question or answer to that would be yes, you can absolutely use it for an introductory accounting course. But Cheryl, I'll let you, from the accounting perspective, provide us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you probably have more information than me on how you can kind of make them more specific for each course. But I do know, just in speaking with other disciplines, currently our marketing instructor for Capstone is planning to implement this simulation from Edmundo for next year for his marketing capstone. So it's going to be geared differently than my accounting one for sure. Yeah. So I feel like there's lots of flexibility in what I've seen so far. Yeah.
And just to jump in, sorry about that. But yeah, I think that's really good actually to hone in on that point, that you can kind of take the simulation in a different direction depending on what sort of theoretical parts you really want to stress for the students, you know, what the learning outcomes are. And on the subject of the tax preparation, which was included in one of the questions as well, I think absolutely that's not necessarily something that you have to focus on within the simulation, but at the same time, within the phone venture simulation that you're using now this year, Cheryl, each country that the student teams choose to do business with within the simulation, their companies will be taxed differently depending on which countries they're operating in. So for example, then based on that, you could ask the student teams as a kind of adjacent assignment in one of the weeks to prepare some kind of to do some tax preparations according to which countries they're active in or something like this. So it's kind of having these additional assignments each week can work really, really nicely, I think.
Yeah, I agree. So it kind of connects to Angela, you asked, do you have a different simulation project for each student team of 5 or all within one class? Or does each team that is competing against each other have the same project? So as Leon was talking about, part of our dynamic algorithm is they compete against each other. So they would all be competing within essentially the same simulation, but they're competing as their own company. So each team is their own company, but those companies are competing against one another. So for Cheryl's class, she had 5 teams. those 5 teams would all be taking market share from one another as they compete within the simulation, but the teams are building their own company, making all of their decisions on their own. So they're not competing in different projects. They have the same goal, the same outcome, but they're competing against one another within that. I hope that answers that. If not, feel free to ask again. You just said that
Yeah.
competing is consulting companies to serve the same client.
So when you say they're competing as different teams against each other to what? To provide the best possible solution to their client, the simulated client?
Well, yeah. No, sorry, go ahead, Megan.
Well, so for example, like say you're talking about phone companies. So speaking of, say one team is Verizon, one's AT&T, one's O2, whatever. So each team functions as a different company. So I guess in the sense their client would be the consumer, and they're competing for market share and to have the best company. So they're making decisions across the platform from where they're going to house their physical offices, who's going to be their distributor, how they're going to hire employees, how many employees they're going to hire. So they have to make really specific holistic decisions across a business in order to serve that client or consumer and take the market share from their competing companies, if that makes more sense.
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yep.
Helpful.
And I think, honestly, it might be helpful, given a lot of these questions, if we do a little demo. So one thing I wanted to ask before we go into that, because obviously the theme of this is capstone. So we talk a lot about how you can use this across any class from undergrad to graduate. But as you said, Cheryl, capstone is kind of the culmination of everything they've learned. So how do you see simulation and capstone being like a perfect marriage, if you will?
I like that term, perfect marriage. Yeah. I feel like at the end of our program specifically, it is a perfect marriage because it's bringing together not only accounting, it's bringing together some of the other subjects that they've been talking about in order to solve accounting problems. So I like that relationship between disciplines is brought together in one space in the simulation. And, I feel like it's a nice send off for graduation to kind of get them out into the workforce, just with that well-rounded education or within this course.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So before I give it to Leon or answer any other questions, do you have any other like key takeaways or anything that you would want to say about your use of simulations, about Assiniboine, about anything that you do?
Sure. So I think, I really liked it last year. I went back to it again this year. From a student perspective, I feel that it's really good for them. I think that it, like we said, provides a holistic education, involves other disciplines. It helps with their problem solving skills, their analytical skills, in an opportunity for them to see direct ramifications of their decisions quickly, which is, nice compared to the real world where sometimes you don't see the ramifications of your decision making for a while. So it works well for me. I feel like sorry, some Zoom things popping up on my screen here, telling me that I'm signing out. Anyway, I'll keep going. Anyway, it works well for me, and I feel like my students like it too.
Awesome. So if you could go back when you were doing your CPA, do you think that it would have been something beneficial for you before you went into the workforce if you had a simulation?
It probably would have been. Geez, that's a long time ago, Megan. I haven't thought back that. I haven't thought back
6
that
years
far.
ago.
It would have been more fun. I think it would have been more fun than the courses I was doing for sure.
Yeah, I think about that too. I'm like, man, I wish I had some cool things like this when I was in school because I wrote a lot of papers.
Yeah.
They were amazing papers.
That's right.
But okay, so yeah, like I said, given some of the questions that we've had and some of the content that we covered, I'm going to pass it over to Leon because I think it will be really beneficial for you guys to actually see the simulation. So Leon, I will pass to you.
Yeah, great. I think that's a really good idea, Megan, because yeah, as you say, I think the questions in the chat, I think people want to see it, isn't it, and get an idea. But it's been really interesting hearing, yeah, hearing the conversation and listening in to how you use it, Cheryl. So thanks for sharing that with the audience. I think that's been really helpful and I'm sure insightful. By the way, both of you feel free to chime in if you've got anything to add as I'm showing this. Yeah, no worries at all. So. Of course, we've got about 13 minutes left, so this will be quite a quick flyover demonstration, of course. But if anyone wants to see it in more detail afterwards, feel free to get in touch. So it works like this. So this is the kind of home screen that the students will first come to when they log in for the first time in their teams. And there's a kind of interactive map of the world here. Just to recap, this simulation, the student teams are managing a globally operating smartphone company like Apple or Samsung or one of these big companies. And they kind of have this interactive map of a world here, which they can, well, it kind of starts off small. So at the very first round, only a few countries will be available to do business with. But each round, the simulation kind of expands and grows. So more countries will become available. So if I hover over here, the US, well, we can see this is a country that this team is currently active in, and it gives a little bit of snapshot of the current sales numbers there. What's really great about this simulation as well is that there's this urgent action box here as well. So the student teams can click on this for a kind of traffic light system to really raise any urgent tasks that need to happen, any urgent actions which need to happen. So this is trying to really draw their attention to, okay, this team has a problem with no sales in a certain market here in the United Kingdom. So they need to address that because, well, this team, it looks like, are trying to break into the UK market. There's some other snapshots here as well about the top few teams in the ranking list, some details about how the company's performing, how the team's being measured, and some news items as well. So each round, different news items will let the teams know what's going on in the external environment. And the teams will need to read those news items to inform their decision making. But if I come to the profile section, it's a kind of nice way to start, is just to say that, yeah, there's a fun exercise that all those teams can do right at the very start to give themselves a sort of sense of ownership of their own company by rebranding their company. So a new name, maybe even creating a logo and uploading that here, and a new slogan as well. They'll also add their team names here as well, their first and last names, and they can each take a role in the simulation as well. So if you want, as the instructor, you can define what those roles should be for each team, or you can just let the students, of course, decide for themselves. So this simulation is very much, of course, well, it's covering a range of different focuses depending on what the focus of your course is, but we're talking about more sort of finance and accounting kind of focus today. So let's just go straight into the results part and say that, well, there's a range of financial documents that the teams will have to analyze. So here they can look at the balance sheet. They can view it in a different way as well. And they can click on these I buttons for a bit more of an explanation on how things are performing, also by country that they're operating in as well. So there's quite some detail there. They can view different years as well, past years, to spot trends and things. Same with the income statement. Again, they can view this in a different way and get some breakdown of different costs. Cash flow statement as well. And the great thing is that all of this data is, of course, in relation to this particular student team's virtual company. So it's much easier for those students to get a sense of how that relates to what they're doing. And it's that context and relevance, really, which is really great. There's also some analysis to do on the inventory as well. So whichever countries the teams are active in, they can really go into some detail on what the demand was like, what they've sold, what they've purchased, and what they have left in stock. And they can view that in a different way here as well. And what's often nice is that we see student teams kind of copying and pasting all this data into like a shared Google spreadsheet or something to work out some averages or doing some different calculations. Same with the financial data as well. Perhaps they paste some of this data into a shared spreadsheet to do some ratios and other calculations as well. They have to analyze their staff data as well to find out how motivated their staff are and educated and what the workload's like. but also how many new staff have been hired and how many staff have left. They get to do, well, a range of other analysis as well. There's a positioning matrix they can look at, again, to see how they're performing against their competitors, but also a range of other analysis on the market as well. So by country, they can really go into some granular detail on how they're performing against a range of different multipliers. And that's really nice, because then it means there's never any ambiguity over why a team is doing well and why they're not doing well. So if a team is kind of really at the bottom of the ranking list, there's no, as I say, there's no sort of question about, well, why haven't they done better kind of thing. It's all laid out here and it's all plain to see. Okay, but really getting stuck into what the simulation is all about, it starts off that they really have to kind of, once they've done their analysis of the externals and the internals, they'll start to formulate a business plan. So they'll formulate an idea through the discussion with their teammates on what sort of company they want to be, what will their generic strategy be, and then maybe they elaborate on this a little bit here as well. They'll do their SWOT analysis, which will be blank when they first log in, but they have to add all of these parts here as well. And then again, they can elaborate on this down at the bottom. They'll set their vision and they'll choose how they'll grow their company. They'll even choose the targets they'd like to focus on, which is really great. So although the teams are directly competing against one another, of course, each team will have a different focus, a different strategy, and will even be able to set different targets, which is really strong. What's really nice as well, just this academic year, is that we've also introduced a lot of new sustainability points, as you both mentioned. And here, for example, the teams now get to choose which of the UN's United Nations Sustainable Development Goals they would like their teams to focus on. So they can choose 3 or 4. But of course, they need to think very, very carefully about this, that it's not greenwashing and that they're genuinely, as a phone company, able to support some of these initiatives. And again, they need to elaborate here at the bottom as well. So they'll do that once they've done their business plan, of course, which is based on the collective conversation of their groups. That's when the fun starts, because now they'll come to the decision section and work through all of these different kind of functional areas of their business. They can even hover through and they can access those areas here in this kind of interactive map of an office, of a sort of company's headquarters. So if we start off with the countries, well, it works a little bit like this. If we come to one of the countries, let's say this team wasn't currently active in the Netherlands, it would look like this to start with. They would have to analyze a load of data along the right-hand side, what the costs will be for having your local offices there, what the sustainability score is like, hovering over this pie chart to see what the demand is like for the various customer segments. And once they some other information as well, but once they decided if they do want to enter this market, if this market fits in with their strategy, then they'll click enter this market, and then they have a range of decisions to take across a number of points, like determining the selling price specifically for this country, and a range of other things as well, supporting local communities, the size of their storage locations and energy labels of their warehouse. But that's just specifically for this country. So they have to do that for every country they want to operate in. Then they have to take some management decisions, what sort of structure they like their organization to be, where their headquarters will be, and the impact that will have on taxes, but also sustainability impacts and overall impact as well. They can hire and fire different managers and choose the focus they would like for their different managers as well. They'll take some HR type decisions, some product decisions, working with a manufacturer externally to produce their phones under license, perhaps asking their manufacturers to make arrangements about sustainability, and a range of things about innovation and purchase costs and reliability research, all of these kind of things. Choosing a logistics service provider, of course, the sustainability impact, reliability impact, but the costs, of course, for distribution of each of these as well. And then there's some kind of global marketing decisions they have to take as well. There are some extra financial parts in this simulation where, the teams can have the opportunity to apply for loans, either positioned as kind of crowdfunding loans or traditional banks, or even a kind of teacher's bank as well. And depending on how we've set the simulation up for you, that can be needed more or less, depending on what you want. So we can actually start the simulation off at the start with so that the teams are in a kind of worse cash position, if you like, and that means it'll be more necessary for these teams to access these kind of loans. Of course, there's a huge, well, there's loads more to show you, but for now, I think that probably gives everyone a little bit of a flavour on how it works. Of course, at the end of every round, where the calculation happens at the same time for all the teams, the first thing the teams will want to do is come straight to the ranking list, where they'll see where their team is sitting, what position they are, what their cumulative score is for that round and all previous rounds. And of course, they can see their name and their logo here as well. They can also access the help desk here as well, where our help desk colleagues will get back to them with any questions they have too. So that's, yeah, a very quick fire view of the simulation. Anything to add, Megan or Cheryl?
No, that was awesome. Quick, but you covered all of the bases.
Succinct.
Yeah. The only thing I would like to add, just that helped me out a lot with my CFO challenge, is I get some help from Edumundo at the end of each round on what the students could have done a bit differently to improve their marks based on the decisions that each group made. So that gave me some help when I was giving feedback to the students, which was really nice too. I had forgotten to mention that.
That's great to hear. Yeah, well, that's another way I think that's really nice, Cheryl, that you mentioned that, because that's another way that we're kind of feel that we differentiate ourselves as well, is in terms of the service that we deliver. So it's not just about the quality of the software, it's about then how it's presented, how it's delivered, and how it's supported as well. So yeah, we're quite close to the hour. Megan, anything else to add more generally?
I don't think so. I just, yeah, thank you guys for coming. One more question just came in. Can you use the simulation at MBA level? Absolutely. Yeah, so it can be used across levels. So we touched on this, and no apologies. You can always listen to the beginning later, but I'll touch on it again now. The simulation can be used from undergraduate all the way through to MBA. And like Leon was just showing, we can adapt it. So typically before we'd have someone start a simulation, we would meet with them to understand from their perspective what they want for their course and what their goal is for their students. So for Cheryl, it's a capstone. She knows exactly what she wants them to get out of it. So we would help to create the simulation in a way that makes sense for her for that course. We can, to Leon's point, you can make them cash poor in the beginning so that they need to focus on loans. So we can make it more or less complex based on where they're at. And we do that through really communicating with you and better understanding your students and your course. So yeah, we really like to be hands-on and working with our educators and providing the best possible outcome for the students. Absolutely, yeah. Thanks, Megan. And just to add as well, finally, because I'm aware we're at the top of the hour, is just to say, so George has just, our colleague George has just messaged in the chat to let everyone know about another webinar we're having in March. So I just put a little slide up about that as well. On Thursday, 9th of March, we'll be having our guest speaker, Dr. Peter Wollstonecroft, who's Deputy Dean at Liverpool Business School, talking about how they take a kind of a strategic approach to embedding experiential learning across the business school, across a range of programs and courses. So if you're interested, feel free to get in touch about that. Yeah, well, let's draw to a close. If anyone has any final questions after the session's closed today, feel free to get in touch. You can get in touch on our website. There's forms you can complete, and we'll get in touch with you, of course. My email address is also on that final slide as well. But it's been really interesting, hearing the conversation. Thanks so much, Megan, for taking control of things today. It's been nice actually to also take a little bit more of a back seat today as well, and not such a have the pressure on me for a change. So that's been really good. But Cheryl, thanks so much as well for giving up your time today. It's been really interesting, and we really appreciate that.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you so much. It's always fun to chat with you.
Absolutely. And well, thanks to all the participants for joining. Yeah, well, as I said, we'll follow up with a recording as well. But yeah, really glad you could all make it, and take care.
Awesome. Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.